from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, hashtag stepping down. Jack Dorsey resigns as CEO of Twitter. We'll talk about what new leadership means for the future of the internet's town square. Plus, Omicron. How worried should we be? The World Health Organization warns that despite milder symptoms, the new variant could fuel surges with severe consequences. Moderna's co-founder joins us this hour. And the return of Black Friday. Visits to stores and shopping centers up 48% from a year ago, but still well below pre-pandemic levels. How is Cyber Monday stacking up? We'll discuss all of that in a moment. But first, let's get a look at the market. Stocks climbing and bonds falling as a relative sense of calm return to global markets. Investors reassessing their worst case scenarios for the Omicron coronavirus strain. Our Kriti Gupta joins us now with more. Kriti, how are investors digesting this today?
Well, Emily, they're really turning back some of that panic that you saw on Friday in particular, especially with this Omicron variant. Remember, we have seen variants before, completely normal behavior. We saw this in July when we had the Delta variant first emerge. It's kind of panic selling across asset classes. And then the next day or next trading session, a lot of defensive kind of buying. And that's exactly what you're seeing today with the NASDAQ outperforming the S&P 500, this fast and furious rally to really buy the dip. And remember, 2021 is known for their shallow pullback. So this is a completely normal thing to say, really taking all those tech subsectors up, even semiconductors. The one that didn't, though, was the Golden Dragon Index, those Chinese ADRs. You still are seeing that regional bias towards the U.S. But let's look under the hood, though. What actually drove the S&P 500 higher? And that was biotech. Moderna, in particular, the highest index contributor in terms of stocks. But it also gave BioNTech a pretty good boost as well. This, of course, coming as BioNTech starts to build their own vaccine candidate that addresses this new variant. Moderna saying that they're actually on track, and some of those analysts saying they actually have the best mRNA technology and capacity to really deliver those vaccines. I threw up Adagio Therapeutics as well because they actually earned an upgrade over at Morgan Stanley, saying that with this new strain of the virus, you will actually see more demand for their antibody cocktail in particular that could help tackle that virus. But let's get to one of the biggest micro stories of the day, and that, of course, is Jack Dorsey resigning. I wanted to show you what his really three companies, Square is in yellow, Twitter in white, and then compared to the New York FANG Index in blue, looked like on a stock performance basis during his time as CEO. And you can really see Square has outperformed. It's no surprise here that he is choosing to stay part of that company despite or taking into consideration that interest in cryptocurrency. Something to watch is how he expands kind of that passion onto the Square platform.
Right. And of course, the big question is why now? Kriti, thanks so much. Moving on. Jack Dorsey, as Kriti said, co-founder of Twitter, is stepping down as the company's CEO. He says Twitter is ready to move on from its founders. Dorsey's dual roles as CEO of both Twitter and Square have caused much controversy over the years. Activist investor Elliott Management also made a concerted push for him to step down over a year ago. Didn't happen then. So why now? For more on this, let's bring in our senior executive editor, Brad Stone for Bloomberg Technology, and Techonomy CEO David Kirkpatrick. Brad, I'll start with you. Look, Jack's memo says a lot and not a lot. What more context do we know about why and why now?
Well, look, I mean, Jack has always marched to the beat of his own drummer. You take one look at him today, and you can tell that. He also, as you say, remarkably, has run two public, very high-profile companies. I think it's a bit of a surrender and an acknowledgement that, you know, his management of Twitter as a public company is facing some significant challenges. As you mentioned, Elliott Management has a stake. Silver Lake Partners has a stake. There have been peace treaties in the past, but they want this company to grow, and it has lagged. It's lagged other tech companies, which have tripled their market cap. It's grown maybe 76% in its stock price since Jack took over, and that's compared to an S&P 500 that's probably twice that growth in that time. So I think that investors were going to want more. They do want more from Twitter than Jack has been able to provide.
The most we get in terms of an explanation here, David, is that Twitter is ready to move on from its founders. Do you see that at all as a rebuke to what Mark Zuckerberg is doing, doubling down with Meta?
Yes, I do. In fact, I think it would be very hard to read Jack's memo to his staff today without hearing an implicit criticism of Zuckerberg, especially sort of far down in there when he says, you know, some founders choose their ego over their company. I mean, who has chosen their ego more recently than Mark Zuckerberg in renaming his company over his own personal obsession with the metaverse in a way that really confounds more or less everyone else? But I do think, you know, Brad's right. And it's great to be here with you, Brad. Square is a company that has so much more potential than Twitter. It's not even funny in the long run. And, you know, he's also been at Twitter for a very, very long time. And he was pressured by the investors to get out. So it adds up.
Well, it's also interesting given that when he took over as CEO of Square, everybody thought that he would eventually leave his role as the CEO. When he took over as CEO of Twitter, everyone thought he would leave his role as CEO of Square, and he never did. And now we see the reverse happening. Sort of the biggest clue we've gotten as to his interests now was a couple of months ago. He said if he wasn't working at Twitter or Square, he'd be working on something else. Take a listen to what he had to say then.
If I were not at Square or Twitter, I'd be working on Bitcoin. If it needed more help than Square and Twitter, I would leave them for Bitcoin. But I think, I believe both companies have a role to play, and I think anything that we can do as companies to help also find the right intersection between a corporate narrative and a community open narrative is for the best.
Meantime, both Twitter and Square have been doubling down on cryptocurrency. And of course, the person who is replacing Jack has been the CTO of Twitter, also worked at Twitter for more than a decade, Parag Agrawal. What does this promotion of a technical insider, Brad, tell you about the future of Twitter?
Well, look, this is someone who has worked with Jack for the past 6 years and has been at Twitter for 10 years. I don't think it signifies that significant a change in direction. It's interesting. He's very technical. He's now yet another of these very high-profile IIT graduates who are now running another Silicon Valley company. There's Microsoft and Google and Palo Alto Networks and IBM and so many others. He's tweeted very infrequently. It's sort of surprising. It'll be interesting to hear what his vision is. I mean, you mentioned the crypto project at Twitter. It's called Blue Sky. He's been running that. It's been always a little ethereal to me and unclear what that means for Twitter as a product. You know, David was making this great point about Microsoft and Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and this pivot into the metaverse. And we kind of joked that Facebook has been reinventing itself willy-nilly and copying its competitors. But, there's an argument to be made that sometimes the only thing worse than doing that is not doing that. And Twitter has remained fairly stagnant, fairly, the same over the past 5-6 years. So it will be interesting to see if the new CEO really has a different vision for Twitter.
Now, some of the things that Jack did accomplish, Twitter is now profitable, and he did take a significantly different stance on President Trump's account than other social media companies. He banned President Trump permanently from Twitter. Facebook hasn't done that. YouTube hasn't done that. David, do you think that decision took a toll?
I think it took a big toll, Emily. And it, to me, is not entirely certain that it's not related to this move. I think, what I hear is that he actually has not been in evidence in the offices of both companies very much in the last year or so. Of course, the pandemic's been underway, so a lot of us have been away. But I think that, you alienate a lot of people when you ban Donald Trump from Twitter. And I think that may have really burdened him with some of the pushback that he got as a result. Although in reality, the story they say anyways, that he didn't make that decision. He was off on a desert isle in the Pacific somewhere, and one of his deputies made that decision, and I believe that. But he is the CEO, and he was where the buck stopped, so he got blamed for it.
Well, and to be fair, many people also applauded that decision. Well, many people also applauded that decision and thought Twitter was making the right but hard call. So quickly, one last question, David. He's left a couple of times and come back. Is Jack really gone for good?
Gone from Twitter? Yeah, I would say he is. I mean, the thing about Square we really have to remember is this is a company that could become one of the world's great financial companies. And if he succeeds in incorporating his vision about the importance of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin into Square's future, when it's already a $100 billion company, one of the most valuable financial companies in the world by many measures, and with a huge runway ahead of it that you really can't see for Twitter based on its current trajectory, he's got way more on his plate already. He does not need to come back to Twitter. He's got the pride of authorship. That is probably plenty.
Right. All right. David Kirkpatrick, founder of Techonomy, our very own Brad Stone. Thank you both. Lots to continue to watch here. Meantime, Meta has delayed the debut of its rebranded ticker. Parent company of Facebook will continue to use the ticker FB until the first quarter of next year. Meta had previously announced it planned to change its ticker December 1st. Now that's being pushed. Coming up, it's been less than a week since the world first learned of the latest variant of COVID-19, Omicron. Flights being restricted, uncertainty about the vaccine's potency, and much more. I'll speak next with the co-founder of Moderna about what he thinks about this new strain and when a new vaccine might be available. That is next. This is Bloomberg.
If the virus escapes the protection of our vaccine after a booster dose, which will be very difficult, I think, but we need to check it. We have already last Friday started the process of developing a tailor-made vaccine that not only we have very high level of confidence that we will have it ready within 100 days, but we have very high level of confidence that we can manufacture it by billions if needed.
The CEO of Pfizer there, Albert Bourla, earlier today with concerns quickly growing about the latest variant of COVID-19, and that is Omicron, first discovered in South Africa. There has been a rush to block entry from certain countries in South Africa, but also optimism given the advancement of vaccines and boosters at this time. For more now, I'm joined by Noubar Afeyan, founder and chair of Flagship Pioneering, also the co-founder of Moderna and chair of the company as well. Noubar, great to have you back with us. So look, we're hearing a lot of things about Omicron. Symptoms are milder, patients are younger. The Moderna CEO has said that it's already probably in every single country. Given what we know about antibody levels right now, how worried are you about Omicron and the state of the virus?
Well, Emily, thanks for having me on. I think worried or optimistic are luxuries that the last 18 months should have got us kind of to begin to move away from, as opposed to being determined to protect ourselves and very vigilant. And so I definitely think that this threat is something that we have not seen before. The number of variations, mutations on this virus are surprising. They're not theoretically impossible, but extremely rare. And so we have to take it for the serious threat that it poses. Now, we have a lot better weapons to fight back against it than we did 18 months ago. But that I think that, again, worrying, we always should be worried when we're under attack. I think it's what we do about it that matters.
So what should we do about it? And what will Moderna, for example, have to do about it? Will this strain elude the current vaccine? And what are the challenges if that's the case?
Well, Moderna issued a statement on Friday afternoon with a comprehensive plan that we already have prepared for this eventuality that comprises a number of steps. One, quite rapidly verify whether the immune response that a boosted patient will receive from our vaccine is sufficient to protect against infection from this Omicron variant. That will be known in the next couple of weeks, we said. Second, we have activated additional tests for multivariant vaccines that we've already got under testing. In this case, the original 1273 plus the beta variant, and then the 1273 plus the delta. So we're already in human trials there, and we've already got data. And that might be the very quick follow-on line of defense in case the 1273 alone does not do the trick. And then, of course, we've already started, and we've said a program that we think within 60 days or so will take us to a place where we have a fully variant-specific, Omicron-specific vaccine should we need it. But this is, I don't think there's going to be one solution to this. There's going to be a number of defensive steps that we'll take to make sure that we're fully protected.
What's the fastest possible timeline that a Moderna Omicron booster could be available?
Availability to the public is a function of regulatory approval under emergency use, and that will be largely determined by the FDA, which I'm sure will look at the data, the facts on the ground, the level of threat, and decide how much additional data it needs for this sequence variant to be able to allow it to be more broadly available. I can't speculate on that. I think the piece of it that we control, we've said, Stéphane Bancel, the CEO, has said, we think we're in a position to do, based on the 10 years of platform development we've done already with mRNA and mRNA vaccines, I think we're in an ideal position to respond within the kind of 60-day time frame.
Talk to us about the new science involved here and what we know about antibodies and antibody levels right now and how that's informing your work.
Well, it's a very good question, Emily, because I think this whole question of antibody levels is a very underexplored, or I would say undermeasured aspect of this pandemic. We talk about antigen testing to see if you've been infected, but actually what you really want to know is how strong is the antibody response in your body in response, let's say, to a vaccine. And that's something that we have relatively little activity in, other than the fact that the people are publishing papers, academic centers showing very strong correlation between antibody levels and vaccine breakthrough, so that the higher the antibody levels very clearly correlates to better protection. And of course, the FDA is making decisions for booster approvals and the like, all based on antibody levels. So I think that as we enter this third phase of the pandemic, hopefully not a very serious one, but it could well be, we need to be mindful of how the virus is varying itself and how our antibody level is adequate or not to protect us. And it's really those two measurements that have to happen side by side. And when all the manufacturers have said over the next 2 weeks, we'll tell you if our vaccine is still effective, essentially it will be by measuring neutralizing antibody levels against this new threat. And I think that should be more broadly available and more broadly deployed, because let's face it, if we do have a big threat, we're going to have to take protection in terms of masks and separation and curtailing travel. But importantly, we're going to want to make sure whatever boosters we have, we make available to the most vulnerable. Well, the most vulnerable turned out to be the ones that have the lowest levels of antibodies. That's where the vulnerability comes.
Noubar, I know you got to get to another meeting, but one last quick question. Do you see the need for a COVID shot like we have the flu shot year after year, or will variants start to become milder and milder? Like, which way is this disease going to evolve?
You know, Emily, it's an interesting thing. On the one hand, we know more about this disease than all other diseases combined in history, I believe, in terms of just the sheer number of people that it's impacted and that we're treating and learning from. On the other hand, we really don't have good experience of how a pandemic becomes an endemic threat. And that transition is what we're all guessing. So it's really guesswork to say, is this going to become tamed and become like a common cold, or is it going to be like the flu where there's a seasonal vaccine? I'd say there's a third alternative that we haven't seen before. And so we have to be pragmatic. Look, this is the first time you and I spoke. I said, this is an evolutionary battle between a pathogen, a virus that is attacking our social nature, and the collective immune system of humanity. That battle continues. We've added technology, we've added behavioral changes, but at the end of the day, that battle will end up where it ends up, and we have to be ready for all eventualities. I've said publicly that I think more likely than not, it ends up looking like a seasonal booster every year, but there's no high certainty to that because we're in uncharted territory.
All right, Noubar Afeyan, always appreciate having you on the show, co-founder, chair of Moderna, CEO of Flagship. Appreciate your perspective and additional context there. Okay, coming up, it is Cyber Monday, and the deals are everywhere. We're going to break down the numbers from this holiday shopping weekend and how supply chain issues are impacting consumer carts next. This is Bloomberg. Consumers are also still cautious about going back into stores. It was our first post-vaccine Black Friday, and while the numbers were up from last year, they weren't what they were pre-pandemic, and that could also have to do with so many people shopping online. Today is Cyber Monday, after all. For more on this, I'm joined by Bloomberg's Brendan Case. Brendan, break it down for us. I know people started shopping weeks ago because they were worried about supply chain issues, and because most people are doing their shopping from home these days anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we saw that on Black Friday. You know, Black Friday itself, at least online, had sales that were a little lackluster, down a little bit from last year. Now, is that a sign of impending weakness in consumer spending? Probably not, because the last few weeks before Black Friday were very, very strong. And so I think what you're seeing is just the spreading out of demand over a longer time period.
So talk to us about how we're expecting Cyber Monday to stack up and some of the hot sellers and the trends that we're seeing.
So Cyber Monday, there's a lot of concern that you could see something similar to Black Friday, where the sales compared with last year are not great. Could be down a little, could be up a little, but they're going to be basically probably not showing a big change. Again, that is probably a function more than anything else of demand getting spread out over the season. And what you're seeing in terms of hot sellers so far, toys are always a big hit. Adobe called out everything from Barbie dolls to Nerf toys. Electronics and video games, always popular. PlayStation 5, again, is a big hit. And what you're seeing also is gift cards, because with gift cards, you can push demand into, or the actual acquisition of products into next year. And given the supply chain issues, that is a surefire winner, even if you can't find stuff on the shelves.
All right, so if you need an idea, gift card it is. They are always available. Bloomberg's Brendan Case, thank you for that update. Plenty more still ahead on Bloomberg. Coming up, we're going to bring you a special edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 with Alphabet and Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Stay with us. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.